Again, if you're newer to the study or if you're just dropping in on us today, 1 Corinthians is a letter. It's a letter between an early church leader named Paul and a church that he started a couple of years earlier in a city in central Greece, in ancient Greece, called Corinth. And he's writing them after being away for a couple of years elsewhere in the Roman Empire to check in on them and then to give them some answers to some questions that they have and to address some concerns that some people who really have a heart for those in this community who are from that community have brought to Paul as well. And so he's writing for a lot of different reasons. But he's really writing to point them to Jesus and to Jesus' example of humility, because they're living in a culture that's very self-driven. It's very much about gaining status and honor and recognition for you and what you have and who you are and what you've become and what offices you hold. It's not a very humble place to be. And so Paul is kind of trying to address different ways that their society acts in kind of arrogant, prideful ways, and even their church community, and call them back to a place of humility. Posture of humility. So again, if you weren't with us last week, I just want to give you a quick recap of what we talked about, and that'll help us lead into today. We finished a couple of weeks talking about giving last week, and giving from this letter, Paul gives us a couple great perspectives. One, it's not about sacrificing to the point of suffering. And so when we give to meet other people's needs, or we give to a church or anything like that, or a nonprofit organization, it's not about suffering. It's rather about people using their surplus and their extra to meet each other's needs so that an entire community can thrive and everybody can experience more of an equal, status in life together. And it defies the way the Corinthians think, and it defies the way that we as Americans think, because what it involves is not just going by logic, but storing the things that are necessary for our daily lives and investing the rest in other people instead of just accumulating wealth. And that is not the message that we get from a lot of different sources in our society today. So whatever the amount that we give, and whatever the kind of resource, because giving is much beyond money. Money is a part of it, but you can use your time, you can use your skills, you can use other possessions or physical resources that you have. So giving is broad. So however we choose to give, our motive should be 1, generosity, 2, we should be able to have joy. And so again, if we don't have enough and we're thinking it's all about sacrifice and all about experiencing hardship, that'll take away the joy. Giving is not meant to be that way. And also about gratitude. We recognize God's given us a lot, and we're thankful for the things that we have, that God's received us, and we almost see everything we have as belonging to God, which makes it easier to be generous and to give, because we haven't possessed that thing for ourselves. We see it as we're managing these things that really they belong to God. And so also when it comes to giving, in God's community, we need to make sure that we're careful with our resources, that they're managed by people who are trusted, but also caring and also diligent. And ideally, they would come from within whatever community, is managing the funds. And there should be some layers of accountability. We talked about that a little bit last week as well, what that might look like. And so just some very good wisdom for approaching giving. And today we're going to shift gears just a little bit and talk about growth goals. Next week, we're going to just recap all the main things that we've talked about in the letter and just talk about love, because that's where Paul leaves things with the Corinthians, is he highlights love, which is a great place for us to end on as well. But this week we're going to talk about some growth goals. I think these are things you could apply personally, and these are things we could apply as a church as well. But just some good targets and things to aim for in our lives if we want to be a growing person and stretch ourselves a little bit. We're going to come across some terms that you may or may not know. The first one is Macedonia. It's a Roman province. In case you don't know where those countries are located in present day, it's here on the map. That green section in the middle, just north of Greece, it includes the very northern portion of Greece. And so that's what it's talking about. Also, we're going to hear the word Pentecost, and this is a Jewish feast, a feast in ancient Israel. It's celebrated 50 days after Passover. So Passover was the time when Israel celebrated their deliverance from slavery in Egypt. It was very close to the time of Jesus' death on the cross for our sins as well. And so about 50 days after, think May, early to mid-May, most years. And it required every adult Jewish male in Israel to travel to Jerusalem to offer the first fruits or first part of their grain harvest. We're also going to come across that word first fruits, and it's talking about a portion of everybody's first harvest of grain, wine, olive oil, wool, and they offered it at the temple in Jerusalem. And the reason why they did it was to provide for the needs of the priests and their families. That's what that donation, that gift was, what it went toward, providing those needs. So you're going to come across those terms. Just want you to have an idea of familiarity with that before we go into things. So there's going to be 4 growth goals, and we're not going to spend much time on each one, but hopefully there'll be things that are good advice for you and good advice for me, and they really do help us pursue growth in our own lives and as a church. So the first one is make plans, but be flexible. And I want you to notice this. As we read about the way Paul describes his plans, we notice that they really revolve around spending time with people. And this is something that Christine and I have come to kind of realize the importance of. It's taken us about 10 years in our marriage to come to that point of realizing the importance of not just doing plans because we want to experience things, but really planning to involve people in our lives. And my wife is an introvert by nature, and I am an extrovert. And this is something that we're both trying to do in different ways. So it's not always going to look the same way. You don't have to have a certain personality type to have this focus. But we're going to see Paul does this, and I think it's if we want to grow as people, we're not just making plans, but we're trying to incorporate people that we want to build relationships with into our plans. Because the things we do are great soil, so to speak, to grow relationships in. And that's important. We see Paul do that. This is how he starts. We're going to be in verses 5 through verse 18 of 1 Corinthians 16 this morning. So Paul starts out this way. He says, I will come to you after I pass through Macedonia, that region that we just talked about. For I'll be traveling through Macedonia, and perhaps I'll remain with you or even spend the winter so that you may send me on my way wherever I go. And so first, what he's doing is he's talking about some logistics, and it's complicated because travel in the ancient world, it's not like you just hop on a plane. And there are hundreds or thousands of miles separating where Paul is at the moment with where Corinth is. So when he says, I want to come see you, there's a lot that's involved. And maybe you have people in your lives that you want to go see, but it's a process, right? And so you have to figure out when are logistics going to kind of dovetail in a way that's going to allow me to see people. Maybe I'm already heading that way or part of that way. We had a family reunion last year in Idaho, and so it gave us a good chance to, from that point, embark on another couple of journeys to see some friends in northern Idaho and out in Seattle, because we were already over halfway there. So sometimes it's just about figuring out how to lay things out, or maybe waiting until you have enough resources because things are slim and you're living month to month and you have to kind of plan ahead to be able to save the resources that you need to make plans that incorporate people. So a part of what Paul's dealing with is logistics. And we want to make plans, we also have to consider that aspect. Another thing that Paul considers is he's considering his far away friendships. And maybe this is something that we need to do. My nature is out of sight, out of mind, which is bad because my family is very out of sight. They live halfway across the country. And we're actually taking a trip in another week. A week from tomorrow, we're leaving on a road trip to go see some of my family out east. But it's a big process. And it's been hard for me over the years to maintain friendships. After my college years, I went to college on the East Coast, and then I moved to Utah. And I really dropped the ball on a lot of my friends. I'll see them on Facebook, but as far as personal conversations that I've had, most of my college friends I haven't talked to in 20 years. And that's been the reality. And looking back, I wish that's something that I would have kept going, that I would have kept investing in. And I've learned that over life. You know, I have room to grow. And Paul's saying, he says, I don't want to see you just now in passing, since I hope to spend some time with you if the Lord allows. And so even though they're hundreds of miles away in Corinth, he says, I really want to get back to you and foster this relationship, because he spent a couple of years in Corinth and he built some really strong friendships, but he wants to maintain those even though travel is hard, it's difficult in the ancient world. That's an important priority to him. He wants to spend time with people. And he also realizes too that he has some very important current opportunities. He's in a different part of the Roman Empire in Ephesus, which is present-day Turkey. And he says, I'll stay in Ephesus until Pentecost because a wide door of effective ministry is open for me, yet many people oppose me. And so he sees some great opportunities to help grow this church in the city of Ephesus and tell more people about Christ. There's a lot of responses, and so he doesn't want to leave prematurely when there's opportunity where he is. And so sometimes when we're making plans, we need to consider what's happening before us right where we are, right? There's important things and important people in our lives here. And so it's important to make plans, but also have an aspect of flexibility there. And Paul realizes when he's making these plans, I think, that life is very unpredictable. Because if you look in those verses that we just read through, there's a couple of phrases that'll stand out. One is, perhaps I'll remain with you. Another one is, I hope to spend time with you if the Lord allows. And so Paul realizes life is unpredictable. And so the way that he's navigating that, he's not failing to make plans, but he's making plans and allowing for flexibility. He's sharing his intentions and his desires with these people in Corinth, hundreds of miles away. He says, I want to visit you sometime in the next year, right? I have an intention within 9 months to 12 months of making my way over to you, but I don't know exactly when things are going to line up. So I'm not going to make a promise too far in advance, but I am going to communicate my heart and my intention. And so maybe you have some faraway friends and you really want to get together with them. It would be very appropriate to call them up or text them or message them and say, hey, I miss you. I really want to spend time with you. But life is complicated. There's some logistics, and I don't know what the timing is going to be. But if God allows, sometime in the next year, I would love to make it out to you. These are my intentions. And then Paul actually follows through with his intentions. And this is challenging because the way things actually play out, we can read through the book of Acts, which is a history of the early church, and we can see how things play out. There's great opportunities in Ephesus, but then there's actually a riot that takes place because so many people are turning away from the worship of Artemis, the local Greek deity there, to Jesus, that some of the people who sell the idol statues to people in town, they're losing business. And so they rally people in the town into the theater, the Roman theater, and they have a huge protest there. And so as a part of this protest, the town essentially is up, about ready to head into a riot. And so Paul has to leave town very quickly. And that's what accelerates his journey back into Macedonia and then down into Greece eventually to see the Corinthians again. But he doesn't know that that's going to happen. So he has to be a little bit flexible. And so make plans, tell people your intentions, but avoid specific promises too far in advance to allow for some flexibility. But incorporating people in our plans, that's an important growth goal, even if you're introverted, even if it's challenging for you. The next piece of advice we see has to do with supporting emerging leaders. And these are younger people, oftentimes young adults, and maybe you're in that phase of life or you're entering into that phase of life personally, or maybe that was 5 decades ago for you. And so you're looking around going, who can I help in this way who's emerging in leadership? Paul says, if Timothy comes, see that he has nothing to fear while he's with you, because he's doing the Lord's work just as I am, so let no one look down on him. And we know from other places in the New Testament of the Bible, Timothy was quite young at this point, probably early 20s, maybe mid-20s or up toward 30, but he's fairly young in society, especially to be taking on some kind of a leadership position. And so Paul urges them, don't look at Timothy's age when you assess him for his spirituality or his capability. He says, I've worked with him. He is spiritually mature and he's very capable. So don't judge him for his age. And then he goes beyond that. He actually says, send him on his way in peace. And the word send him, it's not just like, oh, see you later. It has the idea that you're getting behind somebody and you're supplying what's necessary for them on the next leg of their journey. So it's invest in this guy in different ways, maybe even with money or resources so he can be furthered on his journey. So he can come to me because I'm expecting him with the brothers. He says, now about our brother Apollos, I strongly urged him to come to you with the brothers, but he was not at all willing to come. However, he will come when he has an opportunity. And Apollos is another emerging leader in the early church, probably about Timothy's age, who's also been through Corinth in the past. And so Paul is encouraging these Corinthians to welcome young adults who are involved in God's work and to supply what's needed to further their journeys. I had an experience when I was probably 21. I came out to northern Utah to help and assist some churches over spring break with a group of about 5 other college students that I met. And as we were out, there was one church that we were involved with, and we had lined up a few small churches. Most churches had 20 people or less in central Utah to help out. And we were maybe doing some advertising for them or holding special services or things just to be of assistance in whatever way we could. And one of the churches that we went to, they, unknowns to us, it had less than 15 people attending. I think 10 or 12 people were a part of this church. And they took an offering for us as students. We did not ask for that. We just wanted to come and help. But they felt like they wanted to support people who had an interest in serving in this area. And so they actually gave $1,200 to our group of people to help offset the cost of flights and traveling and food for the time that we were out there helping these different churches, which was very sacrificial giving, right? When 10 or 12 people put out that kind of a gift. And we were, very humbled by that and not expecting it at all. But it's interesting because after that point, 3 of those 6 people ended up moving to Utah. 2 of them worked as pastors in churches, and then another one was very involved with the local church. And so they saw, even at that point in the future, how if we just invest in these people to further them on their journey, this will pay returns. They didn't know that we would end up back in the same state, right? But they could see that investing in younger people, trying to follow God's will, was valuable. We have somebody who attended our church for about a year, 2 or 3 years ago, named Nicole, who's in Thailand right now. And she is trying to figure out God's will for her from this point on. She's in her mid, maybe upper 20s, about 27 or so. And she's been there and been sending prayer updates out this last week. They went there last Friday, and they've been there for about a week and a half. And so as a church, we have tried to help further her journey. And hopefully by the end of this year, she'll be moving to Asia full-time to work among some Buddhist people groups that are there in that area. And so it's a wise thing to invest in and help support people who are emerging leaders, young adults who are trying to seek out God's will. That's one thing we can do as we pursue growth as a church or even as people. Third thing Paul mentions, exercise courage and compassion. And this is really kind of a summary of everything Paul has been encouraging the Corinthians to pursue throughout this entire letter. He says, be alert, stand firm in the faith, be courageous, be strong. And then he says, do everything in love. And I think there's a reason why he's paired those comments together. I think it takes a lot of strength to love people. And I think throughout this letter, Paul has been reminding them of different ways they need to exercise strength in order to be loving. Because acting in love, it requires the strength to oppose cultural norms. And that's what he's been challenging the Corinthians to do throughout this entire letter. Acting in love requires sacrificing social status, sometimes things that would cause us to be, rise the ladder in society or have more things, have more of a luxurious life experience. And also, acting in love requires sometimes relationships, risking relationships because we want to love, and as we love a broad spectrum of people, that doesn't always sit well with some people. They want us to only love people like ourselves or maybe like they are. And so sometimes actually being courageous and loving people can damage our relationships. We can lose relationships as we're willing to love other people. And so it takes, again, strength for us to be generous and to risk being misunderstood. And sometimes to put relationships on the line if we think that showing love, might pose a risk to that. And so that's a part of growing, being courageous in the way that we love people and not just looking at how that love is perceived by other people around us. The last thing that I want to talk about is this last phrase, and this is fun because we think of this in one way. We might approach this as a society in one way, but I think Paul is headed in a totally different direction. So this is important. He says, brothers and sisters, you know about the household of Stephanas. They're the first fruits of Achaia, and they have devoted themselves to serving the saints. Saints just a word for other followers of Jesus at that time. And so he's using a little case study here of a guy named Stephanas and his household, and we get the idea from the next couple of verses that they have been very involved in this local church. He says they're the first fruits of Achaia. So this region of Greece where Corinth is, they're some of the first people that have come to believe in Jesus in that region. So probably about 4 years before Paul's writing this letter, they came to faith in Jesus. And ever since that time, they have really poured themselves into serving. His entire household, which is Stephanas, his wife, presumably, his kids, maybe even adult kids and their kids because of an expanded household in the Roman era. Slaves, if he owned slaves, would have been incorporated in the household as well. But everybody seems to be very intent on caring for a growing church community because they're the first ones, right? It would be like if you came to believe in Jesus and there was somebody who told you about him being Paul, and then there was your household and that was it, right? But then as more and more people come into the faith and probably start coming to your household, even meeting there to learn more about Jesus, they're just bringing them into this family and this community of Jesus followers, and they're caring for more and more people as they're coming to faith in Jesus. And they've been doing that for the last 4 years very consistently. They have that heart. They've been very faithful. He says, I urge you also to submit to such people and to everyone who works and labors with them. I'm delighted to have Stephanas, Fortunatus, and Achaeus present, and they're some of the people that have come to visit Paul and brought some of the news that he's responding to through this letter, because these men have made up for your absence, for they have refreshed my spirit and yours. And then he says, therefore recognize such people. I want to get to that phrase, recognize such people, in just a minute, but essentially throughout the first part of these verses, Paul says, I want you to recognize the fact that they have loved you in a lot of ways. That part about submitting to such people, it's basically just saying allow them to lead because they came into this faith before you and they've been faithful in caring for you. And so let them fulfill leadership roles in your life. And then when he says recognize such people, so in our culture, when you hear about recognition, I want to get some responses from you. If we talk about recognition, like somebody does something, right? Maybe it's in your company, your job, or maybe it's one of your kids or your grandkids. They do something that you think deserves recognition. How do you recognize them? What's that look like in our culture? What are some ways we recognize people? Praise, okay. Yeah, somebody might get up like this and be like, I just want to highlight David this week. He came in and he fixed the drinking fountain that was broken in our church, and so let's recognize him for that, which is very true. See, and that's recognition, right? What else? What other forms of recognition? How do we recognize? Huh? Trophies, yes, right. I don't have a trophy for you, David. I'm sorry. Right? We hand out trophies, yeah, or medals at the Olympics. That's recognition. Or like on the smaller level, certificates, your teacher has you come up and gives you a good job for the day, student of the day, certificate or something. Or even at work, we want to recognize you. Here's this nice piece of paper, or here's a catalog. You've been working with us for 40 years now, so we'd like for you to pick one of these items from the $50 and under list just to celebrate you and your 40 years of service to our company, right? Recognize people. That's not what this word means. I think it does mean recognize, but not in the way that we're thinking. The word actually is a form of a word that means to know somebody deeply. And so what Paul is actually doing is he is urging the Corinthians, because this family, this whole household has poured their lives into caring for them, he's actually urging them to take the time to get to know these people deeply. Sometimes even in church scenarios, and John Wolfe has talked about this in past years in some of his talks and things he's sharing with us, but sometimes we're just content to let people pour into us and then we live our lives, but we're not necessarily intentional about getting to know people personally. But the thing is if somebody's caring for you and they're pouring into your life in different ways, they're serving you or they're serving your kids or they're serving your grandkids in a church situation or even beyond that, if they really care about you and they're consistently pouring their time and their resources into you, those would be great people to establish a friendship with because you already know they care for you. You don't have to do anything for them to care for you, right? So that's already a known factor. And if you begin to get to know them and to develop a relationship with them and make an effort to do that, these are people that are going to reciprocate, right? Sometimes you form friendships with people and you realize after 6 months you're the one doing all the work, right? And so that's not really a true friendship. But in this situation, you already know those people have been pouring into you, before you even made an effort. So if you make an effort to get to know them deeply, it's probably going to turn into a pretty great reciprocal friendship. And that's what Paul is urging the Corinthians to do, because he sees them and they're willing to be served by this family and they're willing to give them certificates or highlight them or, recognition, but they're not willing to take the time to actually get to know them on a deeper level. And Paul says that's important. If you want to grow, you need to honor faithful servants, but not with trophies or certificates or lip service. You need to honor them by actually forming deeper friendships with them. That would be the most honorable thing that you can do for them. That's a great growth goal for us to pursue. And so as a church who hopefully is striving to improve and develop and grow, we would be wise as well to take this advice that Paul's given the Corinthians today, to make honoring devoted servants, people who are serving you or your family well in different ways, to make exercising courage and compassion, even when it's difficult, even when you risk being misunderstood, or it's not received well. We would be wise to support emerging leaders, even though our gut reactions might be to say, well, these people are inexperienced. What do they know? Paul would say probably a lot more than we realize. You can be very capable and very spiritually mature and still fairly young. And so support them because you never know where God's going to lead that person. And then finally, formulating flexible plans in the ways that we've talked about today. Sometimes we're not intentional enough and we miss out on opportunity and we lose track of faraway friends. And then sometimes we make too many specific promises, right? And we just disappoint people. And I think Paul would say a happy medium is wise, and that's a good goal for us to pursue as we grow. Before our meal, I just want to leave us with 4 questions to consider if you want ways to maybe think through these ideas further. One question you might ask yourselves, I might ask myself, how can I make an ongoing effort to really get to know someone in our church community, or if you are a part of another church community, you just happen to be here this morning, your own home church community. But how can I make an ongoing effort to really get to know someone in our church community who's been consistently serving me or my family? Another question, what cultural norm, status symbol, or potential misunderstanding do I need the courage to oppose or give up or risk in order to love like Jesus? Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes we have to go a different direction when we want to love, and it costs us culturally. Thirdly, what servant-hearted young adult could I further the journey of? Maybe I'm aware of someone. And if so, in what ways could I best help? You might have to actually have a conversation with them to figure out what ways you can best help. And lastly, what tentative plans do I need to make to maintain a faraway friendship or make the most of a current opportunity? Make it tentative, but make it intentional, right? Communicate what you hope to do. And you can hold me to this too. I have a friend who's in Seattle now, and I've told him, I said, sometime this year, I'm going to come up and spend a couple days with you. We're going to do some hiking. So if December 31 rolls around and I can't say that I've done that, you need to get on my case a little bit, right? And say, hey, you need to stay faithful to that because it's a good growth goal. Let's go ahead and close in prayer this morning.